Absolutely. Let me go share my screen. Let's see here. Share screen number 2. We are share. Okay, how's that? Yeah. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Beth. Thank you, Carol. It's great to be here again, or here first time again, depending on depending on how wide the scope. And basically, what I want to talk about today is working in UX during a pandemic and beyond. I'll tell you a little bit about my story. And also kind of speculate, based on kind of where we're going and what changes we might see. Um, so let's focus on my, there we go. So yeah, so as Carol was talking about, I've got my own company. I've been doing basically my own freelance slash micro business thing since 2008. Really, I do mainly user research. I'll talk about that in a bit. And yeah, I've got the UX Careers Handbook and some LinkedIn Learning courses in UXPA. But particularly, it's awesome to see Ken Norman on the call because he started me off way back. He got me my first job, and I at the end of my time at Maryland, I said, "Do you know anyone looking for a junior?" I guess it was a human factors engineer, I think at that point. He referred me to my first job, and that launched my career, and here I am today. And then the story continues because my oldest daughter actually is majoring in college down at Maryland in more kind of interactive media, kind of very super creative stuff. And then, but daughter number 2 is actually just got accepted to University of Maryland, wants to major in psychology, she says, and minor in physics. And she wants to do some kind of research. So while it may or may not be, kind of the exact same space I'm in, it's pretty close. I mean, actually, the truth is both daughters have been pretty close. So very exciting that she will be going to Maryland very, very soon. Okay, so before I even talk about kind of any story, any background, any of my background, I want to explain the framework that I see UX, the framework that the book kind of sees UX, and kind of what's perhaps a common framework in the business world. Essentially, UX involves 3 things. Number 1 is designing stuff. Number 2 is evaluating stuff. And number 3 is strategizing about stuff. Now, the truth is that there's no pure design or pure evaluation or pure strategy. It can be very much focused on one of the 3, or maybe a mix of two of the 3, perhaps, or even some 3 of the 3. However, they're all intermingled to some level. Okay, that's very important. And when we think about how they're intermingled, so basically, I think of my buckets as kind of each one is a bucket of careers. So in design, we have interaction design. Interaction design is largely understanding how a person will, say, go from screen 1 to screen 2, or page 1 to page 2, or one element within a screen to a second element within a screen. It's the interaction between stuff. It's not the artistic beauty, and it's all about the people. Ultimately, it's the users, the end users of the product. There's information architecture, which is largely focused on the structure of information, both the visible structure and the invisible structure that operate behind the scenes, such as a taxonomy, such as various metadata, and so on. Visual design is way more artistic and beautiful. However, again, it's only to the extent that you're helping the people use the product and appreciate the product. Then there's content or information design. There's now UX writing. And basically, then we're talking about the words and the pictures that form usually screen-based stuff in this case. We've got service design, which is really the life cycle of a customer's interaction with a company. the stereotypical example, you walk into an Apple store and you see and you touch the phones and you talk to someone. That's all service design. Or you call up, or you use online chat, or whatever, or social media. It's all the whole of that is service design. Finally, we have technical communication, which is one of the older ones, but it's also kind of connected with everything else, in that it's really the reducing the complexity of detailed, perhaps dense information, help text, and so on. In the evaluation bucket is my favorite piece. Personally, we have user research. So, for example, what I really focus on, things like usability testing, kind of more ethnographic research. Things like there's say that in a moment, some information architecture research, the organization of information, interviews, focus groups, all of that. That's kind of my sweet spot, as well as accessibility. Accessibility is really understanding how people can people who have certain kinds of impairments, such as or stereotypically like blindness being number one, can they use products? But it's not just blindness. It's visual impairments in general, hearing impairments, physical and motor impairments, cognitive impairments, and so on. Can they still use products as intended? And then finally, we have human factors, where, and like I said, when I started, my first job in what was it, 1994, was actually as a human factors engineer, but I was largely doing what I do today. Now we have more of a split in the world, where the human factors element, it's still very, very related, a lot of the same methods, but it's much more based in physical products, medical devices, as well as when we talk about autonomous vehicles, to some extent there's usability, but then also there's human factors, the ability to get into that vehicle, the ability to really be able to use this physical moving product. Cockpit design, even a general automotive design, a lot of that is still bucketed in human factors. Number one, though, that I've seen today, in kind of my business world, kind of what's most visible is definitely medical devices. Medical devices, FDA approval and so on, have resulted in huge studies. I'm only very tangentially involved in it, but the people who are very involved in it have, I think, work more than they ever can do in that space. In strategy, we have UX strategy. So, for example, where the UX meets the C-suite, the CEO of the company, the leaders of the company. Are they designing what people want? We have content strategy, which is really the strategic alignment of the words. Do we have a single voice through the organization? And finally, there's customer experience. Customer experience is really things like voice of the customer. You get those pop-up surveys. How likely are you to refer us to a friend? That's often bucketed in customer experience. I would call all that UX career umbrella. But the one thing that is often put in the career umbrella that does not belong is development. While interaction design, for example, it's fair to say you might need to know some HTML and CSS, very, very kind of light front end kind of coding, that's fine. But when you really get to kind of hardcore development, hardcore coding, it really doesn't belong, because really by the time you get to the development, you've got the set of instructions, and that set of instructions is really kind of after the UX process. Doesn't mean you can't do development and do UX as well, and people do, but there is some confusion. Businesses will say, "Oh, we need a UX developer." That's not a thing. You could do UX, you could do development. UX developer really isn't a thing, and it's kind of a misconception in some business spaces. Okay, so essentially, do you want? There's a lot of stuff there. Can you specialize in everything? I would say no. You don't want to enter that unicorn space. The UX unicorn is kind of a classic concept, which means essentially you can do everything, including that development. And you do this, you do that, you do some design and research and art and the accessibility and the strategy, all like so expert. It's not possible, or at least it's really rare to be really able to be expert in all. And in the business world and overall, if you want to get raises, you get raises based on your expertise. You make income based on your expertise, not on just having a general knowledge of everything. That doesn't mean when you start out, if you want to go into UX career, it doesn't mean when you start out you can't kind of try everything. That's fair, but you don't have the expectation of a higher salary immediately either. But as you progress in your career, it's really that expertise that matters, and the way to achieve expertise is to focus in some area of UX. So what I said before, what I enjoy most is qualitative user research. My favorite method, from the very beginning, I was doing usability testing, and it's still one of the most frequent things I do today. I just last week was doing usability testing remote with truckers as they paid some trucking taxes called IFTA, IRP. Those kinds of things that they have to pay based on the weight of their trucks and the states they cross. But again, what I love about it is things that I know nothing about, areas that I know nothing about, I just jump into. Whether it's farm equipment or social media, but different angles on social media, perhaps I'm not familiar with. I just love being able to jump in, try out different products, sometimes in different languages that I don't even know. That's a whole nother story, and for another day. But I love that. I also love, I do a lot of user interviews often as part of usability testing, and I enjoy that as well, getting to talk with people. But I really, one of my favorite things as well is ethnographic research, where I really kind of understand people's kind of framework, where they're coming from, their background, how they use existing products, and so on. I will say that in my little freelance micro business world, I get way more requests for usability testing than the more ethnographic research. It is what it is. If I could control everything, I'd kind of balance it out a little better. But that said, every now and again, there's projects where I've gone to different places, walked into people's offices, watched them do their thing, and so on, and it's been a lot of fun. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about kind of our main topic of the day. This world that we're in now, this world that we found ourselves now for slightly over a year, and what is the state of work? Okay, so first of all, no matter where you go, no matter who you talk to, these are anxious times. I mean, certainly, and certainly if you're a student as well, it's an anxious time. It's an anxious time no matter what. And that's just a given. There's a level of ambient anxiety in the world that affects everything. It affects everything personally, and it affects the business world as well, and it affects UX. And there's a lot of insecurity about jobs. There's a lot of insecurity about just personally staying healthy. About sometimes it's getting toilet paper. Sometimes it's the various just standards of living that people got used to before then, and the way they live their lives. And it certainly affects everything. Now, when we look at the data, in fact, it looks pretty grim. 2020 was the worst year for economic growth since the Second World War. Okay, so in perhaps probably all of our lifetimes, really, this is really bad. You think, oh, there is no work post graduation. There is no work. Everything is terrible. But I will, note some optimism here on several fronts. Number one, the economy rises and falls. When I started my UX career in '94, things were going really well until they weren't. And then when let's see, when I went off my freelance career, it was mid 2008 when I said, this is it, economy is roaring, everything is wonderful. I'm going to go off and be a freelancer. And then again, a huge crash right after that. I actually lucked into a massive contract at that point, but it wasn't bad. I mean, it really, it didn't, the data, what I saw in the outside world didn't really, have such a negative impact. And to some extent, that was certainly true actually last year, 2020, that is, and I'll talk about all that in a bit. Um, also, we had a tremendous dip in employment. BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, has wonderful dynamic data sets that you can draw on if you ever kind of are curious about work dynamics. And basically, when we look at total employment population ratio, seasonally adjusted, we kind of factor things in. We had a terrible dip, in 2020 early on, after the pandemic hit, and now we've got things are kind of coming back, not totally, but they're coming back. Um, so again, things are not so dire, for certainly. And then if we zoom into UX, if I just recently just typed UX, no city and state, just UX, largely in the US. It says one of 13,336 jobs. Now, in fact, if you look at that, people just use UX because it's a buzzword and they think it's cool. If I use UX, people will find me. Okay, not good. They think they're cool. Nonetheless, there's still a lot of jobs that are really UX jobs. So, basically, what I would say there is that UX largely has not been impacted. Where has it been impacted? Well, UX is not industry specific, as we know, and some industries have fared better than others. When I look at BLS data for the last month, I see, well, there's probably not much UX in mining and logging. There might be some, but probably not much. But if I look at kind of where UX sits, I do know someone who really did focus in the leisure and hospitality area, and was really in a jam because everything got hit so hard. I mean, you don't want to, like, locally we have Marriott, for example. You would not want to be working for Marriott right now, probably because who's going to the hotel? There's no revenue coming in. It's a lot rougher. That said, professional business services, and this is in the last month. If you look at, I mean, you'll see the same kind of thing for hospitality over the last year. If you look at professional and business services, on the other hand, you've got a lot of growth in the last month. It's kind of waxed and waned when you kind of adjust 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. But that said, that's a lot of UXs in that professional and business services bucket. When you have government, going up, we're on the upswing in government. Certainly a lot of government work around here, and there still is. There's still a lot of government hiring in UX, even as we speak, and there's continues to be that work. Again, because it's not UX spans many industries, and we don't have, and I really think of myself as industry agnostic. Really wherever it is, if it's transport. I was doing, like I said, I was doing transportation and warehousing. My trucking study last week, totally fine. There was UX work there. There was a study to do, and I have something, a mobile app coming up, totally unrelated, or totally something new, different area, related to media, and yeah, totally fine. Yeah. So let me tell you about a little bit more specifically about my story, before and during the pandemic. 13 and a half years ago, I became a freelancer and I lived happily ever after. Well, not always, but by and large, I've found that, as we went year after year, saying, if things are ever not good, I can always join the W-2, the employee workforce. But things have stayed good. It's been good. So, really by and large, I've enjoyed my life, but it hasn't been like sitting on beaches surrounded by palm trees and so on. I've had to work really hard sometimes to kind of make sure things worked out. And And it has involved travel and sometimes beaches, actually, which has been nice. But talk about that travel in a bit. Um, and by and large, I've discovered that my own work philosophy is small puzzle pieces. Really, what I enjoy doing is somebody needs a study done. I jump in, I do a project, I jump out. I jump in, do another project, jump out. I'm working for, I've got 2 projects potentially starting next week. And neither one's committed to a timeline yet or giving me a final contract. They both could come at the same time, but that's okay because they're small, they're both small. I think each one is probably less than 40 hours over like 3 or 4 weeks. And it's going to work. I'll make the puzzle pieces fit, even if it means some evenings I'm working and some days I have off. Puzzle pieces will fit. It's all good. My particular area of kind of what I enjoy most is being with people. And not virtual. I mean, virtually is fine. That's what it is. What it is. But by and large, I enjoy being with people in person. I really kind of offer this high touch research where no matter where you are, I'll come to you. I'll do the research. I'll meet with you. We'll interact. We'll do workshops together. It's all good. And that's really has been my kind of business focus. Why? Because I enjoy it. I enjoy. I get to travel like half the time. Pre-COVID. Half my life is traveling. More so as my kids got a lot older. So they really were largely self-sufficient. And I could do that. But I got to travel all over the United States. I got to travel all over the world. It was awesome. I actually had a 2-time trip to Ukraine for a research for a museum. First one happened in February, where I remember saying, "Oh, someone's coughing on the airplane. I heard about this COVID thing, but it couldn't be." And oh, I have a layover in Frankfurt, but Germany doesn't have too high, I think, a caseload yet. And then like the next week, yes, now Germany is the highest caseload. Like, oh no, I was just there. But still it happened, right? But then that was the very beginning, or end of January, very beginning of February. Things getting nervous. Did a trip to Vermont for a study that they wanted, in the depths of the snow. Did that. It was all fine. And I remember I brought some Clorox wipes, but they told me not to wear a mask. I'm not going to wear a mask. They said don't do that. But had brought some Clorox wipes and wiped down the keyboard after each participant. And this COVID thing hasn't been any cases in Vermont, but we'll wipe it down to be sure. But then boom, like it hits. So then mid-March until June, we're just total lockdown. Here I am in my house, and only remote research. It was a bit of a scramble. That second Ukraine trip kind of evaporated. I may have evaporated for good. I'm still not sure. Which was disappointing. Some projects converted. Some projects said, this is only going to last a month or two. And when it does, we'll resume in person. Okay, fine, whatever. And a little bit of a scramble, but it was actually not a bad period in terms of like remaining busy, remaining billable. Then July to October, there was a bit of a controversy. There were 2 types of researchers. One type of researcher said, I work for this company. They're paying me no matter what. They told me to be remote. I'm going to be remote. It's safe. I want to be safe. Nobody should be doing in-person research. It's totally, it's immoral. Then there were people like me, and I was actually starting to engage in these conversations, saying, if I chose to not do in-person research, I actually wouldn't have a job. I'd furlough myself, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to choose to work in person, in a COVID-safe way. This was my first attempt at this in July in a hotel conference room where where basically everyone's masked. Me and the logger were in the room, 8 feet apart. The participant was like 25 feet from us. Terrible for audio at that point because you'll see the little microphone. I got it right here. This microphone here, awesome when you are like 6 to 8 feet apart. It captures everything. recordings, and which I rely on a lot for the reporting, was awful. There's an upgrade to the microphone where you actually can get a higher end one, the daisy chain. Later studies that I did during this period, I had one by the participant, one by me. But there was a lot to think through, for sure. So I was going in person again, was feeling very safe, had all these protocols in place. Some participants didn't come at their last minute screening that they got. That was in October. It was starting to get a little nervous, and I was like, you know what, I'm getting a little nervous. I did write in the meanwhile. These are all available if you ever want to read them. In May, I said, when can we resume in-person research? In July, yes, I've started doing in-person research in the age of COVID-19. And then what's the best practice? How do we do this safely? And I actually wrote this as encouragement of some of my peers who said, nobody's telling us how to do this safely. UXPA, the local chapter, just had a talk, I think, last month about, I think it was MedStar, that was their speakers were from MedStar, and it was all about how they do research safely. But really, besides my blog post, I hadn't seen much of anything until like last month. And I will say, during that time, that decision to do the in-person research kept me fully booked, making 2020 a totally normal revenue year. I mean, there was nothing, I mean, they were scrambling for sure, but ultimately I stayed billable, I stayed busy by being in person. In November, cases started spiking again, as we know, and I just said, you know what, totally remote. I do have a blog post that I just posted. I actually wrote it like 3 weeks ago, and I was like, I'm going to edit it. Unfortunately, this study was really big and kind of sucked me away. But it's there on my LinkedIn feed and my website if you want to read it. Essentially, what tweaks did I make to my life to make my UX work more tolerable? Invest in way heavier winter gear than I ever owned. At least since I just in Connecticut, but since then, many years ago, I really didn't have the level of winter gear that I need to basically be warm in 15 degrees. I think we've gone down to like 18 or 19 here. My regular runs on the trail, realizing that I rely a lot on sensory aspects of like where I travel, everything smells a little bit different. So I got some scented candles. I wasn't sleeping so well. I got a ring that kind of measures my biometrics at all times and kind of tells me how to sleep better, and actually has helped. And virtual reality, doing virtual reality exercise, using some different apps to kind of explore Google Maps and Google Earth, from a VR perspective, any data. And anyway, so I was like, okay, I'm doing these things. It's okay. Don't love it, but I want to be with people, but it's okay. And I wondered, can I really stay fully busy in 2021 without remote work, or without remote work, without in-person work? That should read. And the answer is probably not. I'm looking at the numbers now, and actually just talking with some clients again that do have in-person work. And I see kind of a later schedule hitting me for the next couple months, unless I do go in person, kind of starting to open the conversations again as the numbers are dropping. So now I just want to kind of talk about, where do we go from here? What's going to happen? When is UX and I mean life in general, but UX in particular, going to be back to normal, whatever normal is? Is it back to normal? UX work will be mostly remote until vaccinations are common. We've got some semblance of herd immunity, I think, and that's okay. It's working largely. It's not ideal for UX. I really feel like some of the aspect of in-person interaction and the creative aspects and the ability to collaboratively design systems has been impacted in ways that we can't quite measure or quantify. But it has had a negative impact. And anyone who I hear says, "Oh, this is UX work, totally cool remote, all good." It isn't. There will be remote UX work, and that's okay. But it's not going to be all there is. There is going to be in person. Maybe it's going to be more intentional. Like we'll work together when we need to work together. We can work remotely when we need to work remotely. But I don't think we're going to kind of remain in this state. Um, and so I will say, if you're finishing up in May, and you want to do UX work, it will likely still be remote, but it won't be forever. And I would also say, expect that place, will matter again. So basically, I wanted to show you this job description that I came across where it said, we're looking for UX researchers, join a well-established association, DC, long-term contract until the world returns to normal, remain fully remote. So I think this is kind of captures it very well. Like, remote's okay right now, not forever. I have heard people say, well, we're going to move out of, UX hotspot, San Francisco, UX hotspot. Everyone is leaving. Is that going to be it for San Francisco's UX hotspot? Probably not. But it is kind of a wake-up call, like, to those crazy housing prices that they had there. Maybe some people will move back and some won't, and hopefully housing prices drop a little, and people who want to do UX in San Francisco, because there's a lot of fun companies out there, will be able to afford it in a way that they haven't today. But I do believe that UX will become more intentional. You won't have to, go to work every day, but a lot of the days. Also, by the way, if you end up wanting to work in UX in government, which, like I say, tons of jobs around here, often or sometimes those jobs are in a skiff, where basically you need some level of clearance, often secret or above, and then remote work isn't an option, and that UX work will certainly always be in person, or at least I believe it will be. But again, I believe that we are moving towards this collaborative, like since UX is about collaboration, I believe that nothing beats in-person collaboration, and UX research. And I really sincerely hope that UX research very fully is back in person very soon. In one of my LinkedIn learning courses on UX, on empathy, and it's not empathy so much for the user as empathy kind of as a UX soft skill. I really kind of had a whole soundbite about why I really, really want to be in person, and that's just as true today. I use the example there. When a song is compressed into digital bits, it's not quite the same, and that's the same for human interaction. And when we're talking, I mean, when everything UX is about human interaction, we lose part of the data pipe. So I do. I mean, I wouldn't be. I don't have anything booked in person. Well, I actually have to talk next week about someone having an in-person study in June, because they were kind of planning ahead and want me to kind of almost commit to it. But by and large, but at least in March, April, May, I don't have anything in person yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if something does come up and I do accept it. Again, contingent on how the numbers are looking. I do not expect to be vaccinated until, I don't know, being in kind of that very low priority group, very, very, long down the road. So basically, that's my story. That's what I wanted to talk about: past, present, and future UX, and what the world is like. I will close with several thoughts before taking questions. Number one, I believe you all have access to LinkedIn Learning through, I believe University of Maryland gives you access, right? And as such, I have 5 classes out there. If you are interested in UX, and particularly getting a job in UX, planning a career in user experience it's about 10% of the content of the book. And the empathy and UX design is actually that planning a career is the most popular of my 5. Empathy and UX design is actually number 2. It's the most recent. And then 2 about freelancing, and then 1 I think that's not as relevant to people listening today, which is about hiring and managing UX professionals. Certainly feel free to check out the book, available through the publisher, through Amazon, and as a rental through Amazon for pretty cheap there. and that's my pitch and about my about the book. And then that's my story and questions. And I was not focusing on the list of questions. I had opened a window, had not looked at it until now. So we could definitely spend time answering questions that people have.
Corey, if it's helpful, I can kind of organize them with you or for you. We have a couple of questions that touch on your points about remote UX is different. We have a question about whether you've developed new practices during remote interviewing that you'll take into the post-pandemic world, and also a question about what platforms you would recommend for recruiting participants for remote interviews.
Okay, so in terms of platforms to conduct the research, I was using a platform called Look Back. I was largely very happy with the platform called Look Back, except each time I did a study, I would say to the client, this is a 1 month license. It's part of the, I'll buy it, you'll reimburse me, we're all good. They just went to a different pricing model where you have to actually commit to a year. So I stopped using them. That was mid last year. And I started just using GoToMeeting as my go-to product. It is not as easy to use as Zoom. Everybody, the whole world can use Zoom now. It doesn't matter. I did a Zoom study because a client wanted me to use it with I think 95-year-old man in a nursing home, and just fine. And I would not, if you said we want you to do a study with a 95-year-old man in a nursing home using any product, I'd say, technical sophistication, whatever. I'd have my preconceived notions. But now, really, yeah, look, everyone can use Zoom. It doesn't matter, age or education or really any computer knowledge. It seems like. That said, I like GoToMeeting best because I can take timestamp notes. That is the killer feature for me, where I can tag things, click on the tags, look back later, in a way that my favorite software of the day was Moray back many years ago, until Moray killed it, which I get because I bought their product once, like a decade ago, and never had to pay again, which was great. I loved it. Thanks for giving me these updates or whatever. And then they're like, oh yeah, we can't. We're not making money off this product. Yeah, I get it. Anyway, I was really sad to see Moray go, but GoToMeeting with those tag notes and a little bit of clunkiness getting people on, but I can. Not mobile's still clunky. Mobile is just clunky no matter which product I use. But at least for computer, for desktop computer, like laptop kind of things, it's awesome. In terms of recruiting, I prefer, I basically, like I say, I do the high touch, and that's still true even remotely. And I basically will use a recruiter, like if it's a local study, like in another state, I will find a local recruiter. If it's a national study, I'll do a recruiter that does national. But I really like having a person do it for me, and I basically just build it into my price. Say, clients, it's, let's say, $300 a head between recruiting and incentive. This is the cost. Typically I do that. If you don't, I say there's cheaper products like user testing, for example, that I don't. Basically, someone's user testing, they generally don't hire me because a lot of it's kind of do it yourself. So basically, my model works for kind of that higher end, more kind of more, we can afford the recruiter kind of thing. So that's largely what I do.
Gotcha. We've got a couple of new questions coming in, but I think we'll pivot a little bit. We've got questions from students who are wondering about the difference between contract work, freelance work, and full-time work, and what you might advise them as new professionals to enter into, and how.
Okay, so there's two major buckets. There's two major streams in UX. You can take the consulting model, or you could take the full-time employee model. And by the way, I will say, I'll give you some basics, but the freelancing and consulting and user experience here on LinkedIn Learning goes into this in more detail. But essentially, the if you do the consulting model, if you do if you actually, it's not sorry, consulting and in-house. If you do in-house, basically you're working for I did some time working at K-12, for example. I was working on K-12. I was leading a UX team, a research team for K-12 products specifically. I wasn't, and I only did that for a year actually. Then I went back to consulting, back to consulting, but I wasn't doing anything kind of external to the company. If you choose the consulting model, my first job, after college and then before graduate school and then after graduate school, was in as a consultant, and I really, by and large, that's been my career. I flipped from project to project for a company. Later, I became a freelancer, and I flipped from project to project still, but for myself, for my own micro business. Do not become a freelancer as your first job. Don't do it. You need to grow and to learn from other people. And you can choose to work in-house at a company, and you can choose to work for a consulting company, and they're both good. You'll have mentors, or hopefully have mentors both ways. After you've been in the field for 5, 6, 7 years, you feel like, okay, now I'm expert. That's when you can go freelance. Because you've got, unless you basically, if you want to actually um, build revenue or make money, you
Yeah.
have expertise, and without expertise, you need other people kind of working with you.
That's very helpful for people getting started. We have a question about a portfolio preparation. My thought is, as a freelance practitioner, that may not be the question that works the best for you. But if you have questions or comments about how students might prep a portfolio, feel free.
I talk about, I actually just uh, earlier this week did a talk for a European audience, and we're talking about portfolios. But basically, in terms of what you have, if you can do school projects, if you can pull in school projects, if you can pull in just projects you do on your own, if you want to volunteer for an organization and say I can improve, and it could be even a club at Maryland that you're involved in. You can kind of do projects for them, all probably public stuff that you can pull in. But the most important thing you want to do with a portfolio is to make sure it tells your story, not, and I've seen this, is as well, we did this as a class. Here's our class project. Here's our class results. Here's what, no good. Unless your portfolio talks about you, and tells your narrative and shows, and it's not about the things in your portfolio, it's about the narrative that you can put around your portfolio.
Thank you. So switching gears to user research again, when you do a study and you come home to many, many miles of footage, do you do your own transcriptions? Are you starting to use Ottertail or other AI-based software to help you with that?
So mostly, what I do is, so while my company is just me, technically I also have a lot of subcontractors. I generally always find someone to log when possible. Again, kind of that goes into my kind of more deluxe research model. But that said, I will, when sometimes it's just me, it's a lower budget thing. I can't afford more than 2 people. I will just take notes right into GoToMeeting. Like I say, they're time stamped and tagged. By and large, I do not need to look at transcripts because it's not market researchy. Because if it was market research, it's about the kind of it's about the narrative. When it's user research, it's largely about the thing that happened with some words along the way. And as such, putting those timestamp notes and just jumping to certain aspects is enough. GoToMeeting does do automated transcripts, just you could turn it on. So I do always keep them on if I need to jump to something or search for something, but I rarely use them.
Interesting. I think we've just noticed that Zoom now has an automatic transcript feature for us too. I haven't tested how accurate it is,
Yeah. Yeah.
but paper and pencil and timestamps help a lot.
Yeah, no matter what you do, by the way, people always have varied accents. I mean, whether it's whether it's foreign or whether it's just a different dialect of whatever, it kills the transcripts. It just kills it. So I would not rely on automated transcripts if you really want to get them. Have a person doing it, but again, taking notes, not trying to capture every word.
Righty. We've got a couple questions that actually ask about business awareness of UX in general, and then a question I think we can combine about you've had foreign clients. So here you are based in the US and you have been traveling abroad. So what is it that appeals to an international client about a US consultant like you?
Well, so the only time I've actually had a foreign client where the client is actually not based in the U.S. is when they have a U.S. market and they need me to do research in the U.S. market. So when I've traveled overseas, it's always for a U.S. based client who needs to understand what's happening. I cannot. It would be really difficult for me to get work permit to from a foreign company for work physically present, let's say in Europe. But if I'm, but it's really easy not always really easy actually. There's been countries where I've had to go through hurdles to get work permits, like for a week. I mean, but it's been possible because I've had big American clients who one foot the bills for often pass visa aggregate or visa processors who kind of do all the legwork. But yeah, but it's either one or the other. So a foreign client who wants U.S. work or U.S. client that I'm already working for who wants me to go overseas and like grab some data on some market that's not American based.
Very helpful. So do you think that there's any growing awareness about the benefits of UX here or abroad, or is it one of those things that people are turning away during the pandemic? What would be your long-term sense of the forecast, the market forecast?
Sunny, very, very, very sunny,
Sunny.
sunburn sunny. It's the market for UX is phenomenal. It's phenomenal in a lot of countries. It's phenomenal. I mean, really, any country where that produces products seems to have UX now. Has some meetups, has people, has communities. It's really remarkable. I will say, in any country you go to, it's often the major cities where you find UX. Yeah, I mean, in the States, I would not be in any. I mean, I would assume if you're going to be in person, you're going to be living in some urban or suburban near kind of a major city area, and that's true anywhere. Um, but as long as you do that and there's a market for it, there's just UX everywhere. And supply demand. If you want to be an interaction designer, there's more jobs, but there's more people. If you want to be a user researcher, there's less jobs, there's less people. But there's parity, so it's all good.
Victoria has just asked us, have you ever had to deliver outcomes to a client that they didn't want to hear? And if yes, how do you do that? How do you tell them? How do you walk them through it?
I mean, my marketing pitch is people pay me to complain. People hire me because they want to hear. Really, I'm very much focused in the generative research and kind of the formative research. There's a product and they want to improve, and they're hiring me because they want to make improvements and they want to know what it is. So it's very rare that a client would be really upset to hear that there's problems. I mean, they might kind of be overwhelmed by the scope of the problems when kind of we really zoom in on that. But they're not unhappy. I mean, it's yeah. I don't feel like they're shocked or unhappy to find stuff. It's just the scope of the stuff that they're. It's that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Very good. So early on when you were talking, I want to say your name right, Manal, I hope that is correctly pronounced, um, noted that there was a sigh of relief when you described that people should really consider it as a pie and should pick their piece of the pie rather than try to become wonderful at everything. So if I'm going to build onto that question. If you are a student at the very beginning, you got to figure out which piece of the pie you want. Do you have any suggestions or shortcuts about how to quickly sample a lot?
I mean, you'll know to some extent. So, for example, if someone told me I should be a visual designer, I would be. I just couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even fathom that. I have no artistic skill. And granted, like I said, apparently some. My daughter is doing like animation design and like digital, like whatever. I don't understand what she's doing. She's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this new form of animation where I'm doing blah blah blah. I'm like, I have no idea. I would not. And when you get to interaction design, Yeah, I've done it. I've done interaction design. I've had jobs, where I was kind of functioning a little more interaction design-y, but not in the last decade. I really, it's okay. I don't love it. I'm okay at it. I'm not as good. When I do research, I feel like I can say I'm really an expert. If I'm doing like wireframes, for example, interaction design kind of oriented wireframes, I don't feel like I have that level. And that's always been the case. So, I would say that, you kind of know, you know what you're good at and you know what you're not. But that said, if they want you to kind of try it all and you're just at the beginning of your career, that's okay. But they have to understand that you're going to be some good in some stuff and not good in the other, and you got to be honest with them. In an interview, it's like we want you to really focus on everything. Of course you want the job, but make sure that it's not going to put you in a place that you're not happy about. So be honest about who you are in terms of your artistic ability, your kind of critical evaluative skill, your really kind of your enjoyment of words, your enjoyment of photography, whatever. Really kind of know yourself. That's really important.
That's great. Mayha wants you to know this is the first optimistic pandemic talk they've heard. So thank you for
Okay.
that, for
Good.
bringing the note of optimism. Cory notes that a lot of the positions that are out there seem to be asking for 5 years or more of experience. So what's a new grad to do? What
It's
do you do?
a perennial problem. It's been a problem for a long time. It's like, well, you need to get in. How do you get in? I would say it's often not 5 years, but like 2 years. But still, those 2 years have to do something, right? I mean, ultimately, there's no good answer except keep searching. There are people who understand. What do they get what do they get for fresh out of college, or of grad school? Is that they get someone that they can shape. But that person may not stay around, because your first job is often not the job you stay in for a decade after that. It's a gamble. That said, it's also cheaper to hire someone fresh out of school than 5 years, because UX has pretty good salaries. So get someone fresh out of school. You can say, well, we're starting you here. As you progress, your salary goes up, whether within company or new company. So starting at that lower salary is just kind of a given. But those are the jobs that will, the places that will get you in the door. There are places, again, no great answer. There are internships, paid. Don't do an unpaid internship after you graduate. An unpaid internship seems like inappropriate on the frame of the company for saying, well, you unpaid internship and like for as your job. But a paid internship is certainly valid, just to kind of with the understanding they're putting a lot of time into teaching you the ropes of kind of the business world, beyond kind of what you learned in school, and that's fair.
I will note that some of our HCIM grads who graduated into the pandemic in May 2020 actually did start with internships that converted into full-time work after about 3 months. It seemed like that was a stopgap measure companies were doing, but they were all paid. Totally with you on students who graduate should not be working unpaid. Alrighty, a question from Wayne about, do you ever get curious about your research impact? Do you want to go back and find out what happened to the places that you worked with and how they implemented your changes?
When 10 years ago, I would have said yes. Now I feel like I've grown up a little bit, where I can say, you hire me to do the research, I'm going to enjoy the job most and have the most fun if I do my job, I do what I'm supposed to do, and I give up like really caring what you do with my data, because it really would stress me. I'd say I'm giving. I remember having conversations like a decade ago where I'd say, I'm giving you this data. Why aren't you doing anything with it? And at best, they would take half my recommendations. At worst, I get like 1%. Like, why did you do this research? And I'd get upset, and I'd say, well, I'm not enjoying this. So at some point, I kind of just gave it up and said, you're hiring me to do the research. I'm doing the research because I enjoy it. I'm going to do what you want. I'm going to have fun with it. And ultimately, it makes me a nicer person to kind of interact with, I think, as a client, where I'm just kind of can be happy and cheerful and say, you want this? Well, might not be the best thing. Oh, you really want it? Okay, we'll do it. Yeah.
All righty. So you keep on rolling. So a couple more questions from students, and I think we're about almost at time, but I think we can roll these two together. There's a question about, well, say you bring a developer background and you're switching into design. How do you help people re-see you as a designer? And then Joshua asked a question about, do you see more roles for researchers or I think maybe the question is researchers or designers? And what should people do about these more technical skills like data science and data analysis? Is that a coming specialty?
So, okay, there are several parts to that.
Several parts, yes.
So in terms of data science, data analysis, it's always been a part of research. You can be and it depends on the size of the company, but usually they're larger companies. You can be a quantitative researcher, you can be a qualitative researcher, you can be what's called a mixed methods researcher, where you do both. I started out much more quantitative. Found my love of research in the qualitative and kind of gravitated more and more there. I mean, every now and again I'm manipulating Excel sheets, but that's no SAS or SPSS or whatever for me. I'm like, that's just not my love. But really, I manipulate data when I have to. I work with data when I have to. But there's plenty of jobs both ways. I mean, there's plenty of qualitative researchers, there's plenty of quantitative researchers, and there's plenty of mixed methods researchers. Again, if you want to be very specific in your research methods, you want to go to a larger company that's going to specialize in a way that smaller companies will say, well, we can't. We need to focus on that mixed methods. In terms of research versus design, there's less research jobs. There's less research people going for the jobs. There's more design jobs. There's more people going for the jobs. It's all good. You can find a job. It really around here in the DC area, there are plenty of jobs to go around. I'm actually very curious what Amazon is going to do when they open up. Because if it is really HQ2, Amazon has a ton of researchers and designers. I know more about the researchers specifically, but if even some of them are moving here, that's going to have an impact on the UX job market. But let's see. Which other part of the question was?
I think, and then the other question might be, if you came from one background, say a developer background, and you suddenly launched into UX, how do you help people re-see you as that new specialty?
You have to do UX work. So I mean, if you're a developer and they say you're a UX developer or whatever, there's no UX in it until you do UX. How do you do UX? It's not in the development. But at any point where you're writing code, you're not going to be seen as a UXer. Basically, you need to back up from the code and be working on the interactive wireframes. Again, you could do coding light for that, but that's or you could do prototyping light, whatever. But you're not making the product, and you need to just back out of that. Say, you know what, I really want to do this part. I can do it. I'm really good at it. And by the way, if there's someone to mentor you in the kind of more UX side of design, all the more that's a good thing. But really, kind of that's when you can say, look, I've done this, and I have a code background. There's nothing wrong, and as a matter of fact, I think it's very positive to understand the way coding works, to understand the limits of what you can suggest or recommend or design.
Very good. I think that Beth will want to put us all face to face again, so we can thank you all together and hear about next week's talk as well.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, what an amazing talk. And I hope that everybody's gotten a lot out of it. I've really enjoyed it so much. Now, let me tell you about next week. We are honored to have a founding member of the HCIL, Kent Norman, and he's going to be talking about information integration theory and the human computer interface. So I do hope you're all able to join us. And again, let's give a hearty thank you to Cory. So this is my round of applause. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. And Cory, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to be here. Anyone who wants to can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter. I'm happy to connect with all of you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good week. See you next week.
Bye, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, thank you for
Yeah.
hosting.
Of course, of course. I loved that. I didn't know the Kent and Cory connection. That was fun to hear.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. That's what we're doing.
And I suspect we could have easily stayed for another half hour of questions across the whole UX field. I have, when we get back to normal, I've got a couple copies of that book, so I will lend them out to students when they're interested. He does a nice job of, bucketing the whole field.
And
I
he's got
think
a great story, great backstory. For the whole
Yeah,
thing.